My opinion is that President Trump seems to not care that much about his popularity ratings because he thinks that this is a necessary thing to do regardless if he gets a hit in popularity or even if it gets a he seemed to have been ready for even a bigger hit, not just with his popularity but also when it comes to the markets and like economically. So he's actually kind of surprised that the market didn't crash even more than what I mean. The market didn't crash at all. It recovered everything and we're now at all the historical highs right now. But at least like the price of oil was supposed to be by 200 by now, and we're still like under 100. We haven't yet even hit 120, which is crazy. So, but he was ready to go all in, even if it got a lot worse and made so many more people against it, right? So, personally, he thinks that it seems like at least that he thinks this is so necessary to finish this evil and to stop the Islamic Republic from being nuclear, that all of these popularity ratings or the markets are irrelevant compared to how necessary this is, and he's willing to pay the price for it. But the thing that so I don't think right now, I mean, given that the Congress is mostly Republican, they're not going to be able to do anything to stop him. But there's something that the only thing that you need to that could change all of this, I mean, probably would change all of this, is the midterms, right? So once the midterms come, the expectation, at least as of right now, is that it's going to be a bloodbath for the Republicans, and the Democrats are going to come and win big and change everything. So once that happens, then all of a sudden they are going to be able to maybe stop him in many different ways. I mean, many people are expecting impeachments attempts and a lot of legal challenges and basically get him busy with all of that. They could, I don't know how effective they're going to be at cutting the funding for the military operations. I don't know. Some people said that that's going to be a big deal. Some people said no, because even without the funding, the president has the power to give the go ahead for military operations. And then once you have the go ahead, then it will be very unpopular for congressmen and women not to fund it, given that the operations has already started. You don't want to leave your men and women fighting defenseless. So I don't know how able they are going to be when it comes to controlling what President Trump does, controlling the funding for the military operations. I've seen different theories on that, but it is going to be a more significant issue once we get closer to the midterms. But what was your opinion?
So I'm not going to say which state I live in for obvious reasons.
Don't.
That's why. But I think he is under a bit of pressure, but I think the Republicans in Congress are even under a lot more pressure. And I'll give an example. So in my state, the Senate race and the governor's race were both leaning Republican. They've flipped since the war started. So I, and the town that I live in, a lot of people are very pro Trump, but they are very against this war. So I think if this war goes on, from their perspective, from Congress's perspective, they might get a lot of pressure to say, hey, we got to end this quickly or else we're going to get slaughtered. I think Trump doesn't care at this point. I do agree with you on that. But yeah, it's hard to read what Trump will do because Trump is always unpredictable. That's his style. But that's my opinion.
I
don't think that Trump is too bothered. I think that he has the his the target in sight. I think he's got his agenda. I think he's going full steam ahead with whatever he's got on his list. Like I think he's just making check marks as he goes, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do this, I'm going to next, what's the next thing? I think that Americans have real short attention spans, and I think that they're going to get bored real fast and they're not even going to pay attention.
It is true that the Americans often don't care about foreign policy that much unless it really affects their purchasing power or their employment rates. And they usually treat it more as entertainment while it's a hot topic, and then quickly move on to the next thing once it's not a hot topic anymore, unless they could actually feel it affecting their personal lives on average, not all Americans.
I totally agree with that statement.
All right,
Okay.
Daniel Dome also has a response.
So every time we hear, oh, he doesn't have enough percentage of support, like who said so? Like Washington Post, who say that? Like what else do we have? New York Post, this journal, that journal. I think this is one of the best incomes of them doing these polls, and like I can, I don't believe I really like once I thought, yeah, if we hear about those polls, so it is must be true. But the way you can play with statistics and do the like statistics is a math, is a science, but it depends on what kind of formulas you use to get your point. It's really hard to me to believe when somebody says, "Oh, Trump doesn't have enough support," because the same thing goes on in Israel every single election. Oh, Bibi doesn't have enough support. Oh, Bibi is going to lose. Nobody wants to support Bibi. Guess what happens in the elections? Bibi wins time after time after time. Though I'm not a Bibi supporter, but somehow Bibi is still on charge. So I can't fully rely on these polls and statistics.
So the way you need to look at different news institution is that you can't look at them as the same. Like different media outlets have a opinion section, and then they have a news section, and then they have an investigative journalism section, and then they also have like scientific poll departments as well, right? So, and for the opinion, like there are, for example, media outlets where their opinions are extremely biased, but then they also have a separate news segment that is more objective and less biased. But for many news outlets, the news section is also biased. Like for example, when it comes to Al Jazeera, the news section is also biased. It's not just the opinion section that is biased, right? But there are some other outlets that the opinion section is biased, but they also the news section is like does a better job at being objective, right? But usually, like some other news outlets, both the opinion section might be biased, the news section might be a little bit biased, but the investigative journalism department sometimes is really good, even though they have a really shitty opinion section that is really biased. Then, but they have another department which does investigative journalism, and they're very reliable. And then the other department, when it comes to doing polls, with most of these places, they're doing scientific polls, and most of them try to get that right. Even if the opinion section is biased, the polls are they try their best to get that right, because that is very black and white, right? You either get it right or you get it wrong, and sometimes they do get it wrong. But if they get it wrong, once something happens, it will become clear that they got it wrong, and it hurts their credibility, and they need that credibility for that poll department to be taken seriously next time. Sometimes people think that the polls got it wrong, but they didn't get it wrong. They just interpreted wrong. So sometimes, for example, the polls is showing how much popularity a candidate has. Let's say it says candidate B is so much more popular than candidate A, and then candidate A wins because the way that the voting works, like the electoral college, like it's not candidate B still had the higher popularity, but because of the voting process in the country, candidate A wins. And sometimes the polls are correct about the specific time where the polling was conducted. But obviously, it changes, right? Like somebody could be up now, and then a week from now, they're not as up anymore because of it keeps changing. But the poll was not measuring people's opinions at the time of the voting. The poll was measuring people's opinions like 1 week before the polling. So maybe the polling was accurate, it was just delayed compared to the time of the voting, right? So the thing is that we can't completely dismiss the polls. Some polls can be dismissed because they don't have a good record, but just because the name attached to a scientific poll is not trusted, don't completely like, you have to judge it separately. Like, a media outlet might be really biased and we don't like them as a source, but if you want to judge their polling department, you have to look at their record independently from their news and opinion section to see whether you could trust them or not.
Like, there is that symptom where, like, you've been asked a question like, do you support Trump? Yes, no, and like you signing the yes mark, let's say. But then when your friends, family, and stuff ask you, oh, what did you choose? So, like, let's say your bubble doesn't like Trump. So you saying, yeah, I signed the no, I didn't, I don't like Trump. But, like, in reality, you signed the yes mark. So I believe it happens a lot in these polls.
Yeah, sometimes the poll acknowledge that, and that's why they have a margin of error section in the polls that tries to acknowledge that. That's why you say, like, they say top, plus and minus 5% or plus and minus 3%, because of all of these other errors that could happen. The question is that if the error is a systemic error or is a random error, is an error in one direction or is it an error that is in multiple directions. But again, this is a whole science, and the bigger thing you need to worry about is whether the question was neutral, right? Because the way the questions are asked could lead people to choose different options. So that is actually the main thing. Like, people who study the science of polling, they study the neutrality of the questions to make sure the question is not leading people to vote in a certain way.
I think Samantha wanted to say something on this topic as well. Samantha?
Yeah, I mean, what's it called? Armin kind of said what I was going to say earlier about how I forgot. No, I'm forgetting what Armin even said, but it was exactly. Oh yeah, about how like Americans do care about foreign policy when it affects them. Like, if the price of gas is going up, Americans are going to care about that, and it will probably hurt the Republicans then in the midterm elections. But also, yeah, what's interesting is because Armin then just brought up about how like the way things are worded in polls. What's it called? It's very interesting because like one thing that like one study found was that if you ask people like, do you think that it's ever okay to rape someone? Like, obviously most people say no, that's not morally okay, but like if you just change the wording from rape to like have forced sex with, that simple change in wording will get a few more people say that they think it's okay to do that than like if you leave the word as rape. So it's just like that weird thing about how like when things get worded slightly differently, it can, yeah.
So I do want to, now that you mentioned it, Samantha, I do want to mention that what I'm saying is not a view against American people, by the way. When I say they care, I just want to, I know you didn't say that, I just want to clarify. This is just the nature of having a more secure country, right? Any other country, the more secure you become, the less you would care about international conflicts, and the more you're going to care about economic issues. Any country, once that reaches that level of stability and security, the people, that becomes a priority of people. So I just don't want to, I just hope that nobody thinks that I'm suggesting that, oh, like, oh, these Americans don't care about the things that they should care about. This would be anywhere else would be like this as well.